Hello, hello. I am going to wait for Malky, and we are going to be talking about hypermobility and the pelvic floor. This is an amazing topic to understand. I'm so excited for this conversation. I think a lot of people don't know they have hypermobility. Hey, Malky. Hi. I was just giving background information about hypermobility, which you have hypermobility. And you have a pelvic floor, so you have both of those things. And you have, dealt with your own pelvic floor issues. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that I kind of wanted to start. I don't know about you, but in my experience, a lot of people don't realize they have hypermobility until they have a prolapse. There is this really big correlation from what I'm seeing between hypermobility and pelvic floor. I hate the word dysfunction, so I'll call it like pelvic floor patterning. And I don't know if that's also something you see, but I want to talk about that, but I feel like just to put everybody on the same page, will you tell our audience what is hypermobility? Because I think people think it's excessive flexibility, which it's not really. It's actually a condition. So let's talk about that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here. So there's something called hypermobility spectrum disorders because there's multiple disorders. It's not just one specific thing. And part of the reason why we'll find hypermobile joints is because of issues with collagen and elastin in our body. And the thing is those things don't just affect our joints. They affect our connective tissues. They affect our ligaments. They affect actually our entire body in different ways. So if you understand anything about connective tissue, if ever meddled in it, you'll know that our entire body has connective tissue running through it. All of our organs have connective tissue surrounding that, connecting it. So it's one big matrix, right, of all these connective tissues. Yeah, and they're all impacted by it, not just our joints, where it might be most noticeable for some people to see it there. So hypermobility is not just your joints. It can be seen in all these different tissues throughout the body. So when it comes to the pelvic floor, our pelvic floor also has all these different components, right? It also has connective tissue. It's not just about the musculature itself. And exactly what you said about prolapse, right? So a lot of people do not find out about this hypermobility until they have something like prolapse. For someone like myself, that was exactly my situation. I didn't know that I had hypermobility until I was diagnosed with prolapse. And for my body, it's actually my ligaments are really, really nice and long. So my uterus can come really nice and low because of these long ligaments. So when we're looking at hypermobility, we have to take into account what are the different factors and how are they influenced. So we have this matrix of tissues, and then the pelvic floor, it doesn't exist on its own. It's not like this separate entity that is not impacted by anything else. It is actually part of our whole entire core system. And inside the system, there's pressure, and that pressure influences the tissues as well. So for the average person, where these connective tissues, right, they have the appropriate amounts of elastin, they have the appropriate amounts of collagen. Those components help create compression. They help the actual tissues. And now you're going to take someone who doesn't have that, and then there might be excessive pressure in some of these areas, and that's going to influence how those tissues respond. So, maybe for the average person, how those tissues responds just might be different than someone who's missing some of that. So I think we really need to understand that it's not just about the joints themselves again, which If we look at the pelvis, right, there's different joints in the pelvis, but also what are connecting into it? What are the different forces inside the body and outside of the body that impact how those tissues are responding throughout the day?
People with hypermobility, it's not only in their joints. There can be skin manifestations. People can have heart palpitations. People can get dizzy very easily. People go to work out and they get exhausted really fast. It takes them longer to recover. There are a multitude of symptoms associated with the hypermobility spectrum. And we can't just look at the fact that somebody might be super flexible in their joints because that's not sufficient. I feel like that was kind of the first thing you said.
Yes. Thanks for expounding on that. Yes, 100%. It affects all of the organs, the tissues, and systems. So it's not just going to be seen in the joints, exactly what you said, the autonomic system, the nervous system, right? Like all these different areas, how we're digesting food, how our organs are working when they don't have that same support. It's going to impact all of these different areas.
Right. And so what we see people are asking in the chat, like, why does that affect your skin? Well, collagen is like, and Malka, you can probably explain this better, but our fascia and our skin and our organs are held together by very tight matrix of cells. And yes, so why don't you explain what you're holding? People who have hypermobility, their matrix is not going to be tightly together, but show us, it's going to be like that. It's going to have a lot more space in the matrix. And that's why the skin will wrinkle much easier. Not for everybody. Everybody presents differently. Malky, why don't you describe this a little bit more in depth?
Sure. So if we think of our structures, and the tissues that connect to those structures, right? So there's like millions and billions of cells and all these different things, right? That create these structures. When we're talking about the elastin and the collagen is a protein. These are proteins that can help bind together. They help create this interwoven matrix that literally can add compression and support.
It's like my tank top, right? The way my tank top is not just floating open right now, and my tank top is tightly woven, keeping me modest for Instagram. That's what our tissues do. They hold everything in this relationship, like you said before, of tension and compression. They maintain the tension and compression that's needed to be in relationship to gravity, right?
Yes, correct. So everyone has this matrix. It's this support, if you want to think of it like a hammock for the body, right? Just like that bit of support that has some give to it. Give is important, right? We think of that trampoline, right? We want tissues that are balanced, that are responsive, that can respond to whatever load that is. And sometimes that's going to mean, right, coming together and interknitting a little bit closer together. And sometimes that means not as tightly woven. And it's that balance between that two that actually helps us when it comes to strength, right? So strength is that ability to generate force. And in tissues that are balanced, right, we have that good balance. So if we think of like a slingshot, right, like if you want an object to go really far, right, you need good balance here. If this band is way too tight, things aren't going to get very far. And the same thing, right? If there's way too much laxity in that band, we're also going to struggle with generating force. And this is, our bodies are not slingshots, but just that concept, applying it to the body of someone who's hypermobile. If you wanted to go do some strength training and you wanted to attach a resistance band to door, but then, maybe for other people, their door is closed and they can, pull from there. But imagine that door is swinging. Right? It can go further and there isn't that same stopping point. This is what happens in hypermobile bodies. So we may be going a little bit further. We don't have that thing to go, wait a minute, pause, stop. And so therefore we're going through this bigger range. And sometimes the ability to feel stable and supported within the body is a bit more challenging because of that. So understanding that, being hypermobile doesn't automatically mean that you're not stable, but there are higher incidences of that happening in the body because of that, right? So for the average person, they're having these things that are put in place to prevent them from going beyond that range. And we don't have that. So it might be on a minor scale, it might be on a larger scale. And so how we are responding to loads in our bodies when we're moving day to day, or when we're exercising, might translate different in our tissues as a result.
Malki, 1 second. I just want to interrupt you for a second, just because questions are coming in, and I want to just I want to redirect this also to the pelvic floor. I want to talk about how people are asking if it's genetic. It generally is considered genetic. I know I don't want to talk personally about your family, but I know in your case that there is a genetic predisposition. I will say, I think it's considered genetic at this point, but so many people, earlier generations, had no idea that this was a condition. So your grandmother or mother might have it, but they have no idea they have it. And you have to go based on their symptoms. And there is a list of symptoms, and people check them off, and they're like, oh, okay, I've been ruled in, right? Like I've been ruled into having this hypermobility, otherwise sometimes known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Also, is that, if I'm wrong, just interrupt me. I just want to for most people, it is genetic. Okay. And then the other thing I want to say is that hand in hand with this, people will be like, well, I don't feel like I have a loose pelvic floor. I will say that people who have hypermobility generally also experience a very tight pelvic floor along with prolapse. So let's talk about the pelvic floor for a minute. But before we do, can you give us a quick snapshot, because I didn't do that, of who you are and why are we talking about this together, and maybe a bit about your own experience discovering you have hypermobility and a prolapse?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Malka Schwartz. I am one of Lauren's Restore Your Core Pro teachers. I am a birth doula. I specialize in rehabilitating the core and pelvic floor. So I started this journey about 16 years ago when I was diagnosed with prolapse after the birth of my first child. I was really, really lucky that I had a midwife who diagnosed me. So I actually hadn't felt any difference in symptoms prior, although I may have had prolapse prior to having kids.
Oh, interesting.
Just didn't know it. Yeah. So for me, I didn't realize at the time how lucky I was. So I didn't think as much of it as like sometimes now people go online and they get overwhelmed. But I was just like, oh, I have this thing. Let me learn about it. I was really, really curious. My midwife recommended pelvic floor therapy. At the time, I could not afford that. There was like one place. It was expensive. They're like, you're going to need to come multiple times. So I was like, you know what? Let me do some research. Let me try to figure this out. What's happening in my body? So when I first started going online and looking at that point in time, there wasn't much information out there. When I would bring it up with providers, like, oh, you're young. This is something for older people. This is not something that happens to young people, because I was 20, right? So I was 20 at the time of my diagnosis. So I'm stubborn. I'm curious. I just kept searching. And one day I came across a site in the UK, actually. And on that site, it was talking about prolapse, and it mentioned EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and hypermobility. And this light bulb went off, and I was like, ooh. And so then I jumped down this rabbit hole looking at it. I'm like, oh, I bruise easily. My skin does that. I've, sprained my ankle a billion times, and just all these different things that were coming up. I was like, check. So that was like my first real entryway onto this pathway to where I am now, right? Was just getting that diagnosis and not having answers. And at the same time, my sister was also diagnosed, and she actually had a worse stage diagnosis than I did. And so it was the both of us, me just being really curious about myself, but also, I have a sibling who has the same thing. So clearly there's something more going on here. And
connecting the dots. Yeah.
Connecting the dots. And then over the years, I started noticing in birth clients as well, like different things going on. And I remember the first time I even heard of a urogynecologist. Like in all those years, no one had said the word urogynecologist. I didn't know what that was. But eventually I started, learning through clients' experiences as well. And eventually I went down that path to becoming a yoga teacher. And from there, there was just more to be had. And I was still injuring myself a whole lot, and I was working out a ton. So even though I had learned about hypermobility, I didn't yet know what that meant for my body and what I needed to do to feel more supported, to prevent injuries. I wasn't 100% sure how I was, going to work on healing my prolapse, but I knew this was like all different pieces of puzzles to the same picture. I just didn't fully figure it out yet. So over the years, it was getting these little pieces and taking a workshop here and doing things there. And then eventually I found you, and that was like the greatest. It was the greatest thing. I was so excited. I just from your free videos that you had was the first time I actually genuinely connected with my course. So, just to understand, I was already a yoga teacher teaching arm balances and all these things and did not have a connection with my core. So,
right. And people who are hypermobile tend to, like you said before, go way beyond their ranges. They struggle to feel centered in many ways. They struggle to find center. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And so, now there's things I can look back and understand, when I was working out and I couldn't feel what other people were feeling and I needed super heavy weights. Then, a yoga teacher who told me, she's like, oh, you're injuring yourself because you're working out too much. You need to do more yoga. Looking back going, she was doing the really stretchy, deep, get into whatever. So there was a lot of misinformation. And then as I started to learn more and more, I noticed that there were clients who were not getting answers themselves, who were really suffering. So, I work a lot with the prenatal and postnatal population, but also perimenopause, menopause, postmenopausal population.
Where people in that population are also just now figuring out they have a hypermobile situation happening. I feel like I know people in their 70s waking up and saying, oh, I think I have hypermobility, and no one's ever connected these dots for me. So it can be at any age. Like your doctor may not necessarily put the pieces together for you, nor will your favorite midwife. A lot of medical professionals are not. Now it's becoming more talked about and more looked at, but it's still pretty fringe in some ways. And I feel like, especially with, again, back to the pelvic floor, so many of my pelvic floor clients have never heard of this. And at first they're like, well, I'm not flexible. I'm really tight, in fact. And it's like, no. Your joints don't have to be super flexible. The hypermobility part is happening like you said, in the matrix. Can you talk about hypermobility a bit more related to prolapse and how the tools that you use in your work to help people come to where are you at now with it all? Talk to me about where you're at with it all and what you're integrating into your practice.
Sure. So prior to, heading into this work, a lot of the work with movement was about getting into shape and how to get into that shape and very specific alignment to be in that shape. And when I took your training, when I started shifting and doing this different work, it was like, wait a minute, what am I experiencing when I'm there? Because I definitely was not feeling that compression, that support in these different moves. I wasn't walking away getting the same thing that other people were getting. So learning completely, first of all, a different way of looking at the body, right? And looking at the individual in front of us as a whole person. They're not just the pelvic floor. They're not just the diastasis. They're way more than that. So how I changed how I look at people, the way I cue people, and really also I'm not here to heal someone else. I'm here to give them the tools to have a better and deeper understanding of their own body so that they can understand it better and move better and feel better. And, my goal is not for people to be with me forever and just come to me for more and more sessions. No, I want you to really walk away feeling like you have a good mapping of your body. You understand what you're looking to feel as you're doing different things. So it's going to be more about the experience and taking that experience and applying it to day-to-day life versus showing up and doing some shapes on a map and, trying to just get a workout. For people with hypermobility, it's more than that, because sometimes it can feel nice to do something, for an hour, a few times a week, but then what are we doing the rest of the time? And how is that impacting how we feel? So looking beyond that, looking at, each person that comes in, what's going on in their life? What are the different factors that might be influencing how they're feeling and how they're moving? And then being able to customize things based on that. I think that is really, really important to look beyond also just what's being said and look at the full picture, look at the full person. And I think that is so valuable and so important for so many people. along with being heard, something you mentioned before is that people come in with all these different things and they're often undiagnosed. So really giving a space for people to be heard, I think really helps them translate all of this so much better into their body and be able to move forward with it. So many of us are just struggling with how we're existing in our bodies. And then that aspect of it can really influence that healing process. So I think it's really important to give some space for that and also realistic expectations. Because I think a lot of people come in, they want to see someone, they want someone to help them. And, maybe for someone like, great, let's work for this and this amount of time and you're good and have a nice life. With someone who's hypermobile, right? When we're talking about, we have genetic components that are influencing our tissues, we have to also look long-term, right? Like what are different ways this might show up? And what are also some of the long-term goals that we might, want to be looking at in integrating all of this information? So I think there's like multiple components really in how I've really changed what I'm doing with my clients when they walk in, how I'm wanting to help them. It's not just for the now. If they're experiencing pain, they're having other things going on with them. It's really about seeing all of them and getting them to understand. This is something that we do have to work on long term and change the way we're moving and experiencing things.
In the nitty gritty tools, Restore Your Core is so much like you said before. When there is a hypermobility, the things that people might be doing, I'm going to use a term like compensation patterns that other people might be doing without feeling the compensations. People with hypermobility might start feeling those compensations pretty quickly, like constantly bearing down. So people who have hypermobility and a prolapse need to be quite cognizant of some of their breathing, core, and pelvic floor strategies. I mean, would you say that to be true? And would you say that to be true? And do you feel that that's a big majority of the tools you're using? So if we're talking to the professionals in the room here, having a look at the way that someone with hypermobility is managing their pressure, would you say that that's also a tool that you are using with your clients and your body for really good results?
100%. So definitely, it's going to be one of the top tools. And I think something that you mentioned that's really important is that we are going to be feeling things that maybe someone else is not feeling when these things are happening all the time, but we might also have impaired proprioception.
Yes. And interoception.
Correct. So what's really important with these tools, right, is to get that feedback, to get that understanding of our body. So 100%, I'm going to be looking at one of the biggest things for sure is the breathing, is that core engagement. And some people actually can move really well. They just don't know that they can move really well. Like they're not aware of what's available to them. So having those tools at your disposal to manage intra-abdominal pressure is one of the biggest keys that a lot of people do walk away with and feel better in their bodies about, because there's so many ways that intra-abdominal pressure is impacted throughout the day as we move, right? As we're doing things. So definitely being able to assess that, being able to assess their gait, their posture, all these different things. Because we know also, right, that a lot of people with hypermobility may also have kyphosis and scoliosis and all these other sort of things. So being able to assess that and look at that and have some tools to help them with that. And also knowing that different people respond differently to different things. So I think having all of those things to look at is really, really important when we're talking about tissues that are more vulnerable to those pressures. Then, we're all technically vulnerable to different pressures, right? But most of us, our tissues are very adaptable and just really great. And just for those with hypermobility, we're a little bit more susceptible than the average person. So that is definitely one of the top things for people who are coming in with that hypermobility. And then the things that impact intra-abdominal pressure, right? I think sometimes people hear that and they're thinking okay, just my core and just this. And it's wait a minute, what are all these other things that are attached to that? And if we're not looking at that and we're not addressing that, then that's going to be a problem. So if we want to talk about the feet, right? If the feet are, collapsing inward, to put it simply, right? If they're pronating, what is happening to that chain all above it? Yeah. So, that's something super common with hypermobility. We'll see those feet pronating, we may see that valgus and those knees. All of these different things are going to really impact, like, well, how is that tissue above it responding? How is it able to manage that intra-abdominal pressure? If I'm gripping my glutes, if I'm gripping the muscles, the tissues, like, how is that impacting things? And, it's important to say that again. I think a lot of people think hypermobility, like all the tissues are just loosey-goosey, and like, we'll see a lot of people with a lot of tension because things are just trying to grip and hold on and just anything to help stabilize. So, we're often seeking input into our tissues in that way and need various inputs to create change, to create progress in the pelvic floor, in the core system. So it's really, really important to be able to assess all those things, but also the things connected, the things surrounding that are going to influence that area as well.
Yeah. And tomorrow I'm talking to Gaynor about pessaries and the pelvic floor. And one of the things she said to me was the biggest thing the RYC training gave her was the ability to assess the feet and gait. And the same thing goes with hypermobility. And it is so overlooked in so many circles. It is a huge, huge factor when you are working, if you're a professional and you're working with someone who has hypermobility, you have to be looking at what is happening from their feet upward as well. Because like Malky just said, it's a whole body situation, which is where the tools in Restore Your Core, I think, have been so valuable to you, right? Like learning to assess feet and gait and hips all the way up. If we're just silo treating into the pelvic floor, we are not really serving our clients very well, because the pelvic floor is almost like at the receiving end of all these forces in both directions, down and up. I think somebody was just asking us what your favorite resources are. Obviously, Restore Your Core. But also people were asking if it is reversible. Prolapse is reversible. If somebody was asking if prolapse is reversible, and I would say, I want to hear what you have to say because you have prolapse, but promising that somebody's prolapse will reverse itself is incredibly irresponsible as far as I'm concerned. None of us have control over the forces dominating someone else's body, but also looking at things as being fixable is also a lens that's a little bit tricky. Because the body ebbs and flows through seasons, times, forces, and changes, and the body is always adapting. And you might be in a low moment, but then a high moment is on its way, but a low moment might also be coming. And I think it's about having the tools to manage the ups and downs of being in a human body, which is never what we're presented with. We're not presented with facts about the human body ebbs and flows with that. But I would love to hear, if somebody says to you, hey, Malky, is a prolapse reversible? How are you handling that question?
So I don't believe in making absolute predictions. I think we can talk about the potential, right? We can talk about how our body is adaptable in many other ways that can be super supportive and helpful. But I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell someone that they won't heal or reverse their prolapse, or they will. Who am I to tell you? And one of the things with my journey is that I was told straight up that I wouldn't heal. And if I ever did, it would never be more than one level. And for me, that was actually a turnoff as well. I was just like, how can you tell me what I will or won't do, right? This is my body. You haven't experienced it. So I think when we tell people they can or can't in either way, we can say what's common, right? We can say that it is very common for people to resolve symptoms, not as common to completely reverse it. For myself, I went from a grade 3 uterine prolapse to a grade 1, but I'm now.
So your uterus was practically at your vaginal entry, and it's now pretty high up in your vaginal canal.
Correct. I did have a car accident about 5-6 years ago, and I would say it's at a stage 2 at times now. But when it's at a stage 2 is when I am squatting on the toilet and put excessive downward pressure. Otherwise, it is not there. So that is something to also keep in mind. I think there's a lot more nuance when we're grading prolapses and when we're talking about it, right? How is that really impacting us? For me, 99% of the time, it's not impacting me. I am human. So despite whatever, I think this is important to talk about, that it's common to have flare-ups. So you can make some vast improvements in your body and still have time periods or days where it's not as high up, right? So for a lot of people, either when they're ovulating or menstruating, right, like they may have their uterus come a little bit lower temporarily and then come back up. And we need to be prepared for that too, that like, what's healing mean? Healing means something different to every person. For one person, it's about making progress in their symptoms. And for someone else, it's about completely reversing that prolapse. So, how we choose to use that language and how we want to interpret that makes a difference too when we're having conversations with people, because for each person, they're going to look at that a bit differently. For me, I look at it in terms of symptoms in my body and how I feel. For me, my prolapse doesn't bother me. Okay, so it comes down here and there. As long as I'm not in pain, it's not impacting my function. For me, this is my personal experience. This doesn't have to be how someone else feels about it.
But you and I both work with a lot of people who have hypermobility and prolapse, and we both see the remarkable success stories. I'm just not willing to make, snake oil promises, but if you do have hypermobility and a pelvic floor pattern, and or you are a pelvic floor professional and you are working with people who have hypermobility, it's important to know they can make drastic changes to the positive. They can learn to support their tissues with a lot more compression, as Malki said. But it's about understanding the forces, no pun intended, or maybe, it's about understanding that this is a kind of complex layered situation that needs a thorough approach. You can't just spot treat your pelvic floor, do your Kegels, or try to find total pelvic floor relaxation. Those are all extreme, those are all silo approaches.
Exactly. And I think also the mindset is huge. At the time that I was diagnosed, there wasn't information out there telling me that I couldn't heal. So I just believed that I could. And I believe that I can find answers because no one was telling me otherwise. But I would say a lot of people today, they go online and they feel overwhelmed by what they're finding. And so a lot of people are discouraged from trying at times because they're, well, what's it going to do anyways? And that's a shame too, because there's so much that we can do for our bodies, and just adjusting our understanding of it. And the fact that even if you get a bit of a reprieve, or, it's one of my favorite things I like to tell people is it's about progress, not perfection. We're not necessarily going to be fully healed, but can we feel better in our bodies? And that is a huge win for so many people. So if you can feel better in your body and understand it better, I'm so happy,
Malki, I'm going to we could talk here for hours, clearly, and it really looks like our listeners have so many questions about this. So I definitely want to make sure that we go in and answer questions in the chat later and when we have time. But you are a treasure trove of information about hypermobility, and it's wonderful to talk to you and to hear your experience and your amazing breadth of knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. It's such a pleasure.
It's been great talking and seeing everybody else here. So thank you, everybody, for joining. And we'll find you on the interwebs. And you know where to find us at Restore Your Core Trainings if you want to be like Malki and know your stuff. All right, friends, we are saying goodbye. Mwah. Bye, everybody.